The latest entry into the ever-expanding Conjuring universe is the long-awaited sequel to The Nun. Set 4 years after the events of the first film, The Nun II sees the return of Sister Irene, now living in France and attempting to move on from her past experiences. Only, as it turns out, the demon she fought in the first movie is still inciting fear and causing chaos, this time in a boarding school. While The Nun II is far from the best, most original or scariest of the Conjuring universe thus far, it is a big step up from the first film of its name. But it still falls on the lower side of the franchise due to repetition, an overly long runtime, and a silly degree of escalation towards its back end. There are two planes of action in The Nun II. The first is that of the children and the staff of the boarding school. Maurice, one of the survivors of the first film, returns as a sort of handyman or caretaker at the school of young women. At the same time, unusual noises and events start to occur, inciting fear from the children and a potential love interest of his. This plane of action is more traditional and predictable of the film's storylines. There are the usual tense sequences, resulting in obvious jump scares. A rather simplistic romantic element between Maurice and a teacher at the school, a group of bullies who inevitably get their comeuppance, and other school-related horror-themed antics. The execution is fine, the sets and the cast are good at bringing the location to life, and Michael Chavez, the director, does a good job at developing some decent but predictable jump scares. Meanwhile, Sister Irene is tasked by a superior in the church hierarchy to investigate a string of mysterious deaths they presume to be caused by the returning demon, Valak. This plane of action is the more interesting and exciting storyline. Here, Sister Irene and newcomer Storm Reid's sister Deborah are on a simplistic Indiana Jones-style historical mystery quest to find the demon. The result is a journey across France with some very creative tense sequences, one of which involves a newspaper stand, and some fun but goofy revelations. This story arc gives The Nun II its energy, and somewhat sets it apart from its predecessor and many of the other films in the franchise. Taissa Farmiga is great in the lead role, a nun who reluctantly takes the mission passed down to her and with fear and determination attempts to take down the all-powerful Valak. The film does a good job at highlighting her faith and beliefs, but outside of religion, little is ever revealed about her on a personal level. She is very likeable, and the film really gives Taissa a lot to work with on a physical and mental level, she just doesn't always have a lot of depth. Storm Reid is essentially her accomplice throughout the film. Storm is fine in the role, but she has next to nothing to say or do in the film. She's essentially there for the ride, a tool utilised by the director and writers to allow Taissa someone to talk to and bounce story points off. The film does explore this character's background and faith in a little more detail than some others in the film, but only enough to make them more than just a plot device. On the other side of things, Maurice and the characters he primarily interacts with fare worse than the heroic nuns. Maurice is set up to be the romantic lead, a charming, funny individual with a crush on one of the teachers and a friendly face for the children around him. However, many of these attempts at charm and humour fall flat because they often seem inappropriate, creepy and cringeworthy. His relationship with one young woman is particularly unusual, especially when he is attempting to start a relationship with her mother. Not helping matters is the fact that every person he interacts with is one note and underdeveloped. They're all stereotypes meant to show different aspects of his character, and in that regard they work well, but at the detriment of them coming across as real, living individuals. The last character of note is that of Valak, the titular nun, depending on your perspective. At this point, Valak has lost their edge and originality. The film often fails to develop any real tension due to repetitive jump scares and an overused display of Valak in the flesh. Once you know what's causing the fear itself is immediately less scary. Every sequence of tension results in a jump scare, usually of Valak snatching or attacking their victims. When this happens every single time, its quality reduces vastly. Had Valak been used more sparingly, had there been false scares or tense sequences where the result was not Valak, their impact on the movie would have landed better. It also didn't help that Valak makes an appearance very early in the film and then just keeps showing up. In relation to this is the final act of the film, After so many jump scares and surprises, the film essentially writes itself into a corner. It can either continue to do what it was doing or push itself further and grander than ever before. It opts for the latter, delivering a fun and epic finale with good set pieces and action beats. But the cost is that the final act of the film becomes a thrilling action movie rather than a horror movie, and some of the surprises, scares and reveals become goofy and corny thanks to a lack of explanation and the use of coincidence. The Nun II is far from the worst entry in the Conjuring universe. It is far better than the first of its name, but it's also short of being one of the better entries due to overfamiliarity, predictability, and an excessive reliance on jump scares. The film looks good, it has some great set pieces and creative jump scares, but its characters and story are often goofy and lacking in depth. The Nun II is at its best fun, and at its worst just another jumpy horror film.